All right, class. First off, as always, good day. I'm glad you're here. So today we are going to be looking at basically how America was built, who was responsible. We're going to be looking at the railroads, U.S. Steel, Standard Oil, and things like that, and how they changed America. Okay. Now, again, the objective today, we're going to analyze how the railroad changed America. We're going to examine how Carnegie and Rockefeller contributed to America's growth. And then we're going to talk a little bit about monopolies and basically go over if they're really good or bad. Okay. Now, here is your warm up picture. Now, the question is asking you, what is this artist trying to say about Standard Oil? Okay, so if you look on top of that octopus's head, it says right there, Standard Oil. Okay, now here's the thing. Um, this is why I make these videos after I taught the lessons in class, because a lot of times you guys have questions or things you don't understand, and that's why I make these videos at the end. So any questions you guys may have or any things you don't really understand, I can address. So in this case, it would be about the octopus. Okay, you guys can probably figure that out already. That animal is an octopus. Now the thing is, though, look at its tentacles. When an octopus grabs something, is it like a loose grab, like kind of like shrug, like when you put your shoulder over somebody? Is it just like that, just hanging over something? All right, or is it tight? Kind of like a snake. When it wraps its arms around, its body around something. You know, and if you notice, majority of the tentacles, you know, have a hold of something except one. And if you look at its eyes, it's looking at something. So knowing all that stuff, putting that all together, it should help you answer this warm-up question. Okay? So pause the video, write your response. Okay, really take a minute to think about this and see what this octopus is looking at. Okay. Um, okay, so take your time on it, write your response, because we're moving on in three, two, one. All right, so before the Civil War, the United States had about 35,000 miles worth of railroad. But here's the problem, they didn't all connect to one, destination. There'd be like a little here, a little bit here, a little bit going over here. And they kind of didn't like connect in all places. So some railroads ended like in Chicago. Some would go, all the way to like St. Louis, Missouri, and then some places down to like you know, Charleston, South Carolina, and things like that. Um, so they didn't like go everywhere. Okay. But by 1900, though, we had about 200,000 miles worth of railroad. So the railroad industry boomed. But why? This is where we have to step back a little bit. During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln created the Pacific Railway Act. And basically, what happened was he wanted to connect the East Coast to the West Coast with railroads. So he basically commissioned the Union Pacific Railroad and the Central Pacific to basically start one on the West Coast, one on the East Coast, and then make their way till they met up somewhere. Okay. And that's exactly what happened on May 10th, 1869, at Promontory Summit, Utah. And that's the picture you see right there up on top, the black and white one. You had these guys, as you can see, they're kind of like a split between them. The ones on the left are from the West Coast, the ones on the right are from the East Coast, and both the trains and the tracks meet up. To celebrate, they take a gold and silver spike, which they use to hammer down the uh, the rails. They took it and bam, smashed it in. Okay. Now, some students in the past have told me, well, heck, I'm going over to that promontory summit in Utah and get those gold and silver spikes. Here's the thing, guys. As soon as they knocked it in, they took them right out. Okay. Those gold spikes and silver spikes are now in a museum. Okay. They're not in the ground. All right. But here's the thing though. It was revolutionary. Never, I mean, for years people wondered what would it be like to go to the to the West Coast, by train, because they always had to stop off somewhere because the train didn't go any further. And then they either take a horse, take a buggy, a wagon, something out west and follow a trail, you know. But now they could just go on the train and it'll take them. So this was just wow, it just like seemed like it opened up the country, you know. Now, thing is though, the trains need to make money somehow. Okay. Now, do they get money from the people who want to take a train trip? Yeah, sure, they do. But when the trains really get their money, still to this day, is transporting goods. Okay. Now, I know there's some people who say, well, don't we have planes and trucks and things like that that carry stuff? Yes, we do. But the thing is, they are limited. Some planes, even the big like bomber planes and some of that, they can only carry so much. And they're only so big that they can't carry a lot of things. Same thing with trucks. They can carry a lot, but they can't carry too much. And that's where trains come in because trains can. And what they did back then is basically they said, okay, the first trains to go from coast to coast, they would charge people like, okay, these trees, these big old chunk of trees, yeah, we could take them 2 cents for every mile per ton. So if somebody wanted to send like 5 tons worth of trees from the East Coast to West Coast, they would have to pay 10 cents per mile, because again, 2 cents times 5 tons, that's 10. Okay. Now, as other trains and railroads were coming through and being created, the competition lowered the price to where it got to the point where it was basically 75% of 1 cent. So less than 1 cent per mile per ton. All right. And again, that's how still to this day trains make their money. Now, the U.S. government, in order to prevent any type of disruption of the trains being processed and be able to go from one place to another, they were awarded land grants to the railway corporations, and they made a fortune with this. They basically like, okay, well, we're going to buy this land, and from these people. Sometimes, um, other executives would know, hey, the train is going to go through this land, so they would buy the land before, you know, and from the people, and then sell like, oh, I'll sell you this land, I own it. I'll sell it to you for let's say 2 times what they paid for it. The train people would be like, sure, yeah, sounds good. So that's how a lot of people made money. And because of this, too, it led citizens to believe that the railway owners had swindled investors, swindled the taxpayers, bribed government officials, cheated on their contracts and debts. So people like Cornelius Commodore Vanderbilt were villainized and they were considered robber barons. Now, here's the thing, were these guys all squeaky clean and things like that? God, no. No, 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 they were not. Okay, they were not all squeaky clean. Some of them did swindle, some of them bribed, some of them did cheat on contracts and debts and things like that. But there was like no one person who did all of that. Okay, but they did do some things like that. Yeah. Okay. Um, thing is though, bribery. This was done all the time at this time. And like I said in class, this is why a lot of people have no idea who the president is, basically from Grant until McKinley. Garfield and President Cleveland and things like that. Those guys are really forgotten about, because the real owners, the real people who had power were the people with the money. So people like Vanderbilt, people like what we're going to talk about soon in a little bit, Carnegie, Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, all these guys who had a ton of money are really the ones who are kind of shaping our country, not the lawmakers, and definitely not the president, because they were in a sense kind of powerless compared to those guys. Now, Monopoly, it's not just a game, it's a real thing. Basically, a monopoly is a company or corporation that controls an entire market. Now, I had some students in class kind of give me like that look, like, what do you mean an entire market? Like a grocery store? Like a store or something? No, no, no. It's more like if somebody owned every single car factory in the world, okay? That's in controlling the entire market, meaning nobody else, you can't buy a vehicle from anyone else but that person because they control all the factories that make cars around the world. Okay. Now, opponents of monopolies. There are people who said, hey, monopolies are bad. And there were some people who say monopolies are good. The opponents of monopoly basically said, you know what? Let's say if somebody, again, use that example about the cars, owns all the car factories in the world, they're just going to raise the price. You know, there's no competition. There's nobody making a car that can sell it at this low price. You know, these guys can raise the price whatever we want. And the thing is, a car is in need. It's an item that is needed by the people. I had a student basically tell me, you know, well, I can walk. So if without a car and you're living in some place like Fresno or LA and you say, "Oh, I can walk from place to place," that'd be like you'd be having feet like Donald Duck, you know. So that whole notion of, "Oh, I could do it," sure you could, but how long would that last? You know. Now that's where the people who are supporters of monopoly would come in and say, "Well, see, here's the thing." If a corporation controls all the market, they wouldn't raise the prices higher, they would raise it lower because then they don't want competition. They don't want people to say, the price is so high, so then they're going to make their own cars and things like that. But here's the thing, though, that's not going to happen ever. No corporation is going to lower the price if they have the complete control of a market. They're not going to do that. Okay, so that is a stupid argument, and I don't use that word very often, but I'm going to use it for that. People who think that way don't understand. Now, here's the thing: owning a monopoly is illegal in many states, and it is illegal in our country. But if you notice, I put the quotations around illegal because corporations found a way around this law, and it's called trust. A trust is a legal concept where one person manages another person's property. So legally, they can say, "Well, I'm not the one who controls it; it's this person." you know so or these people. So Standard Oil was the first trust in 1882. Now it went even deeper. So basically what happens is these companies who had a control on the entire market um, had this thing called holding companies. Now basically, let's say I owned, again, all the car manufacturers, right? Anything that any type of vehicle made in the world I would own. So what these holding companies would then do is, like, again, they don't make anything. It basically owns the stock of the companies that produce the goods and effective, merge them into one enterprise. So let's say again, I own all the manufacturers. I would then say, okay, well, this group, uh, this section, this group of people, they own the all the trucks. These guys, all the cars, and these guys over here, all the motorcycles and things like that. Now, under in the paperwork, these companies make all that stuff. They're all separate from one another. But the thing is, if you look deeper, who controls it all? One person. But it's just broken up into three sections. And in those three sections, then they would have all the car manufacturers here, all the truck manufacturers here, all the motorcycle manufacturers over here. But it's all owned to one person. Now, the two major monopolist people at this time were Carnegie Steel Company, and that was U.S. Steel to this day, and Standard Oil Company. Now, Carnegie Steel was created by Andrew Carnegie. That's the guy you see up on the top picture there. The other guy is John D. Rockefeller. A lot of you guys have heard that last name before. and he was for Standard Oil. Now, these two guys were competitors. They always fought, mainly to see who was richer. Okay. Now, here's the thing: a lot of people look at Rockefeller like, "Oh, that's the richest man in the world." He was, yes, he was, but he wasn't the first billionaire. That was Carnegie. Carnegie was actually the first billionaire, and then Rockefeller then becomes, the billionaire. And if I remember right, still to this day, Rockefeller is like in I think the top three richest people in the history of the world. So that tells you something. That man had money. Now let's talk about Carnegie real quickly. Carnegie was a Scottish immigrant, okay, and at a young age he worked at a railway place, and there was this executive guy who was a businessman named Thomas Scott. Now Thomas Scott basically hired Carnegie to do little errands, take this over here, do this, do that, and then he realized, like, this kid is really good. He doesn't slouch. He doesn't like, oh, I'm gonna get paid, so I'm just gonna take my time delivering this. No, he's on the ball. You know, he's smart. He's ambitious. He's a hard worker. So then Scott basically tells them at one point, you know what? You're not gonna be running errands. You're gonna come with me. I'm going to teach you how to negotiate contracts and talk to make business deals and things like that. You just watch and learn, and I'll be explaining things, later on to you and stuff like that. So he takes them under his wing and teaches them everything to know about business and finance and negotiations and stuff like that. So Carnegie then creates his own company called his Keystone Bridge Company, and they're tasked with building a bridge that goes over the Mississippi River. Now, the Mississippi River is a big, big river, and it can get pretty vicious at times with winds and the currents and things like that of the river. But the problem is this: um, most of the metal used at that time to build things is iron, and iron rusts, and after time it will rust, it will break, and yeah, and we don't want bridges breaking because that's just bad, you know? So Carnegie's like, well, why don't we use steel? And people were like, well, steel, it's hard to make. It takes a long time. It takes like 2 weeks to make it like a beam of steel. So Carnegie went overseas and he found a way to take a large amount of it and to form it into beams quickly, efficiently, and better. So when he came back to the United States, he basically told his friend Scott, he's like, "Hey, I want to do this, but I need factory, I need money, things like that. Can you help me?" And the guy's like, "Yeah, I got you." So because of that, then Carnegie is able to create steel beams not in 2 weeks, but rather in 15 minutes. That's a huge difference in time to create something. So because of that, Carnegie then makes the beams used to build the bridge. Um, it's a success, and people are just, oh my God, you know, we can now use steel for a lot of things, because again, iron does tend to break, it does bend and things like that, but steel is stronger, it lasts longer. So people are thinking like maybe we could build tall buildings. Maybe we can use the steel to build like more bridges. We should take out all those iron rail tracks and use steel tracks. So that's what they did. Basically, all the tracks that were laid out in America, they took them out and put steel ones in. Okay, and Carnegie Steel becomes a gargantuan company, and he's making hand over fists worth of money. Now, John D. Rockefeller, one of the biggest misconceptions I've heard in my years is Rockefeller was came from a poor family. No, no, he didn't. No, again, he was not from a very rich family, but he wasn't from a dirt poor family. They were a middle class family. But the thing is with Rockefeller is he was a hustler. This kid was ambitious. Um, He would sell candy to his classmates, you know, hustler, try to get that dollar. He would raise turkeys and sell them to people in the neighborhood. And speaking of the neighborhood, he would go around asking people, "What jobs do you need? Do you have any jobs for me to do?" They'd be like, "Yeah, this fence needs to be fixed." Boom, he does it. Pay me. You know, "Oh, I need someone to go up on the roof and clean off all the leaves and some of that." Gotcha. Go up there, clean them off. Pay me. He would do any job that was available, because again, his drive was making money. Now, in 1863, basically the first oil well is drilled and oil is discovered in Titusville, Pennsylvania. But 4 years after that, Rockefeller and some friends basically decide, you know what, we should get into the oil business. That sounds like a great idea to make some money. So they invest in a refinery in Cleveland, Ohio. And 2 years later, basically, Rockefeller tells his partners, okay, I want to own this business by myself. So how much to buy out your share? So some guys might be like, hey, $10,000. Boom, you got it. The other guy might say like, oh, I'll take 12,000. Sure, there you go. So basically, he bought out his partners, and now he owns that business by himself. 5 years later, his two brothers and a small group of people um, formed the Standard Oil Company of Ohio, and eventually he would buy them off too. Now, here is where Rockefeller is very smart. Um, Instead of undercutting his competition, going to businesses and telling them, hey, I know you're buying this oil for like $60 a barrel. I'll sell you mine for $40 a barrel. Instead of doing that, he went to those rival businesses himself and be like, okay, how much do you guys make a month? They'd be like, well, we make about $10,000 a month. He's like, okay, so that's like 120,000. Okay, I'll give you 240,000 right now if you sell me your business. Basically, two times what you'd be making in a year. I'll give you that money right now. So a lot of businesses, those rival companies, be like, sure, we'll take it. So he bought out those rivals. And when he bought them out, he not only bought them out, he bought the client list, their material, their workers, the wells, everything. Everything's already set up for him, basically. You know, it got to the point where he owned 90% of all the nation's refineries, oil drills, pipelines, all of it. 90%. That is a ridiculous amount. Okay. Now, this is another part where I say Rockefeller is very, very smart because he does something that people didn't think about back then. So let's say the pipelines, right? Um, Carnegie okay, let's say that. He didn't like spending his money on things. So if there was like let's say, for example, there was a soda at a store and he wanted that soda, he'd be very upset with himself. Not that, hey, he wanted the soda, but that he gave somebody money for that. He didn't like giving his money to other people. He wanted money. He never wanted to spend it and give it to other people. So going back to the pipelines, uh, he would be like, you know what? There's a factory over here that makes those pipes, makes the bolts, the nuts, the washers, everything we need for the pipelines. So instead of paying them money, for all these pipes and all this stuff, he basically said, "I'll buy the company." So whenever he needed pipes, the bolts, and all that stuff, he could just get it from that shop that he owns. And if somebody else wants to buy pipes, or need pipes and nuts and bolts and washers and things like that, they could buy from him. So he's making money. But if he needed something for his company, he could just take it, move it, transfer it from one company to another. He never had to lose that money. All went to him anyway. So that's how Rockefeller really became a millionaire very quickly. Now, this is your warm up picture. Or, I'm sorry, your end of the question, But this one has a picture, though. The question is asking you, what is this artist trying to say about the Senate, which is those people on the bottom there, and the trust behind them. So you see those guys, it says on their stomach, Steel Beam Trust, Copper Trust, Standard Oil Trust, Iron Trust, Sugar Trust, Tin Trust, Coal Trust, you know, all these trusts, all these monopolies you see up there. And if you notice, some of these senators are looking back at the trust. There's a couple guys there. There's like three, four of them that kind of looking backwards like that. Um, so what is this artist trying to say about the Senate and those trusts? And also, um, what do you notice about all these trusts? What do they have in common? You know, so yeah. Okay, now if you're having a little trouble answering that first part, if you look above the trust, there's a little sign that says this is a Senate. If you can read that, awesome. That'll really help you out. Okay, so look at that. Look at these smaller people, you know, and look how they're looking at the trust people, and look at their body language and things like that. So that should help you out. Okay. So once you finish answering this question, you're done with this lesson. All right. So hopefully you learned something new. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Okay. So with that being said, guys, you take care, you be safe, and I'll see you guys later. Okay.